All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's webinar. My name is Danielle Moon. I'm the Director of Programs and Community Engagement at APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. For those of you not familiar with APAICS, we were founded alongside CAPAC, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, which is comprised of API members of Congress. And so we're their sister organization. APAICS is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to uplift Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders to work in public service on all levels. So today we're going to focus our time on we're talking about the Congressional Fellowship Program and answer any questions you might have, but also hear from amazing panelists who are former fellows who are still on the Hill. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. So we have Priya Amilatneni. She was placed in Senator Alex Padilla's office of California. She is currently still there. She got hired as a full-time staff, fortunately. And then our next panelist is Jennifer Min. She was placed in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and now works for Representative Brenda Lawrence of Michigan. So with that, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves and, share your name, hometown, placement office, and briefly talk about your experience, and then we'll dive into more specifics about your experience on the Hill. So we'll start with Priya.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Priya and I'm from Sanford, Florida. And as Danielle mentioned, I am currently at Senator Padilla's office. Yeah, I will say I think it's really easy for me to say because I'm in the office that I was placed in. I've had a really incredible fellowship experience. I started off the year pretty much not knowing anything about how Congress worked or what that job would look like. And through APAICS, I got a lot of support and a lot of community and navigating just a brand new space and really impacting folks in my community and folks in the United States in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Min. I'm originally from McLean, Virginia, so still very close to home, working in DC, but my placement office was the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and I'm currently in the office of Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, where I do press work for her. And something that, really stood out to me from the fellowship was, like Priya mentioned, the community, but also this opportunity for me to have a launch pad into a career that I've always dreamt of. And so in that way, I'm really grateful to APAICS. And when I think of APAICS, I really think of family and unity and a really tight-knit community. And so I think those are the things that I have enjoyed most about the fellowship on top of all the professional experiences that I've gained.
Great. So before we jump into some pre-selected questions, for the audience, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box. And once we get into audience Q&A, we'll go over your questions. So the first question I'll ask for panelists is, why did you apply for the APAICS Fellowship? And we can start with Jennifer this time.
I applied to the APAICS Fellowship because working on the Hill was always a dream of mine, but when I was an undergrad, cold applied to several offices. I watched YouTube videos on like how to land a Hill internship, and I couldn't get on. So after I graduated, I came across APAICS and decided to apply to the fellowship because I thought, I've tried the traditional method, like, let me try something else. And it was actually the first time I realized these pipeline fellowship programs existed. So I applied because, working on the Hill for me was always a dream of mine.
Awesome. Priya?
Yeah, I think like my reason for applying is very similar to Jennifer's and similar to a lot of other AAPI folks. I joke that I was like born being interested in politics. I think I have been talking about it as soon as I was able to talk. So while it wasn't surprising for anyone around me that I ended up working on the Hill, I just didn't know anyone else who's doing it, and I didn't really know how to get my foot in the door. So it's something that I thought I'd be really passionate about. I'm really excited about, but I had no clue how to even start the process of finding a job here. So I applied to APAICS because it was a pathway for me to do that, and it's worked for me and it's worked for Jennifer, where we're in jobs we're really passionate about.
Awesome. So the next question I have is, what were you doing prior to the fellowship? And we'll start with Priya.
Yeah, so I'm a few years out of college. So in college, I spent a lot of time doing public service work, as well as working in kind of health policy spaces, and addressing the policy side of why health disparities arise. I work in health policy right now as a ledge staffer at Senator Padilla's office. And after college, I worked as a refugee services policy analyst. So that is basically, I worked at a state level in Florida and implementing the programs that we use to help refugees acclimate to life in the United States. So got a lot of experience in understanding how federal policies are passed down at a state level and really work to serve people directly. Yeah, and after that, I applied to this fellowship and got it and started working at Senator Padilla's office.
For me, I was a recent grad, and I actually was also an APAICS office intern. And so I learned about the fellowship program through my internship. I was on the office side, supporting the program director and my staff assistant, attending these events where fellows were going. And I was amazed by all the different resources that fellows received, whether that be networking or just one-on-one time with Danielle. And I would realize that if I wanted to work on the Hill and have a supportive network behind me, the most ideal way for me to do that would be through the APAICS Fellowship Program. So I did that, but in undergrad, I did a host of internships in nonprofits and also in local government. And so that's how I sort of showed or demonstrated that I was always have been interested in public service, whether that be on the advocacy side or whether that be on the local government, state government side. And so I just had various internship opportunities and also the APAICS internship.
And I will note on Jennifer's experience that it's quite common for us to have APAICS office interns who will go on to do our congressional internship and then the congressional fellowship. And it's something that we actually encourage because that's part of our pipeline building to make sure we have more representation for NHPIs in public service. So, if you want to apply for our congressional internship first, if you don't qualify for the fellowship, it's common for you to do multi-programs through us. So just wanted to point that out there. So the next question is, how did your fellowship take you to where you are today? And we'll start with Jennifer.
Yeah, I can confidently say that without my fellowship experience, I wouldn't have the job I have now. I'm currently press secretary for Congressman Brenda Lawrence, and it has been such an amazing opportunity. The reason I got this job was through an APAICS connection. There was a colleague, someone who was from my fellowship cohort, who is no longer with the office. He's still on the Hill, but he connected me with the communications director, and we just grabbed a coffee and hit it off. And he said, hey, there's an opening. Would you be interested? And so I realized quickly that process is of knowing the right people and being at the right place at the right time is how you sort of land your next opportunity. And truly, I can say that without the APAICS fellowship, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah, and my pathway was very luckily very, very direct. I was placed in my office and then a position opened up in my portfolio. So I was able to apply for that position and then luckily be accepted for it. I think that Jennifer and I have pretty linear paths of the way that an APAICS fellow will get on the Hill and have a permanent job. I know we have other folks in our cohorts who have gone to administration, gone to nonprofits. And I think the skills that you build, and like Jennifer mentioned, the connections that you build throughout the fellowship have been really useful for all of us. It's learning how the way the congressional process works is applicable to a variety of different fields. And really having that community that's willing to support you and kind of pull you up when you need help and connect you to the right people is essential, and just being able to thrive in this environment.
So both of our panelists have landed, staying on the Hill, whether it's in the same office or a different office. So I wanted to note that we do have a proud number of retention rate of 75%. So that means 75% of our fellowship cohort will stay either on the Hill or in government. So some folks in their cohort have landed in the Biden administration, like Priya mentioned, so they've become political appointees. So it's great to always see these great stories of how our fellows do well and excel. And I know Priya mentioned that she got lucky, but I think it's mostly that she did really well and her office really enjoyed her work. So, that was why she got subsequently selected. So before we open it up to audience Q&A, the last question I'll ask is, what is your current role? We already discussed it, but what does a typical day look like for you? And we'll start with Priya this time.
I think as you all start talking to Hill staffers, they'll probably say the same thing, which is, I don't think there is a typical day. It varies a lot. I can tell you all what today looked like for me, which was actually pretty exciting and very fun. So I think depending on what you're doing and what your portfolio is, it's meeting with constituents about the concerns that they have. And oftentimes learning how to turn those concerns into policy or into actions that will help address the issues that they have. So I did a little bit of that today. We got some legislative text back from Ledge Council. So that's actually a policy that we're going to put forward. We got that translated so that I can actually go into law, hopefully. And so getting edits back from that, a lot of answering letters in the position that I am in. I'm a legislative correspondent. So part of it is just being responsive to constituents and to the concerns that they have. Yeah, I think that's like a day that I have. I'd say it's relatively typical, but it really changes based on what's happening and the news cycle, what's happening with the different committees in the budget. It's very exciting usually.
Yeah, and Priya, I was going to say the exact same answer, that it depends on the day to day. And I think there are definitely some, highs where you're really, really busy and some lulls. And that really depends on the congressional calendar and whether you're in session or out of session. But from a comms perspective, I think every day there is a new beat. You have to keep up with the news cycle. And so that's a lot of my day, like tracking what's happening. What are the national stories, but what are also the state stories, and what are the local stories in the district in Detroit that we can either respond to, or what's getting the most attention? Is this according to the priorities of my boss, and which is this something that she would want to make a statement about or respond to? But the fun part of my job, I think, is really like being on the Hill. And for example, this week we're in session, and so we were voting on key bills in the House, and there are a lot of reporters that are off the floor, wanting to grab quotes. And so a lot of my job as press secretary is to talk to reporters, see like, what is their beat? What's their angle? Is this something that aligns with my boss? And can we place a quote into like a Washington Post story or a New York Times or like Politico, talking to congressional reporters about, what's happening on the Hill. But also it's, writing her speeches, writing her talking points about on virtual panels that she attends, or in-person town halls that she may host in the district, or responding to press requests, press conference inquiries, and doing the due diligence and the back end work to make sure that she's ready for that whatever speaking engagement it may be. Or as press secretary, I also like liaise between press and managed media relations. So it's pitching to reporters, hey, my boss is for example, she just passed a bill on doula services and for pregnant veterans. So I'll reach out and say, like, she just passed a bill. Would you be interested in interviewing her, trying to get her press hits? So for me, it's a little bit different than Priya. And what I like to say and what former comms people have told me is that policy, they're the brains, but comms were the heart. And so the two must go hand in hand in order to accomplish the mission and the objectives of the office.
And on that note, I do want to point out, maybe this is like an application tip for some people, but in Congress, at least in the workforce, there is a shortage of communication staff, especially people of color. And as Jennifer mentioned, communication staff play such an important role because they're not only the heart, but they also translate in order to convey what the members' priorities are, what the work that they're doing, and because it's not always easy for the rest of the country to understand what goes on in DC. So press and communication staff, they play such an important role in Congress. So, if there are potential applicants who have communications background, that's always important to highlight. And I guess that kind of segues well into the first question in the Q&A box, which is what about if you don't have a lot of applied policy experience, and how important is that for you to get the fellowship? And I want to know, before I let our panelists answer this question, that policy experience is not everything. It's really important to have all the components in order to run a congressional office. So press comms is just one part of it. Legislative, administrative, operations, budget, those are all necessary components that go into running a congressional office. So it's not just the policy experience that'll make you a valuable candidate. So with that, I'll have our panelists answer the first question. So we'll start with Priya.
Yeah, I think that as a policy staffer who has a policy background, I think that you still learn so much on the job, that having practical experience is incredibly useful just to understanding kind of the issues that the constituents you're helping are dealing with, or the policies that you're enacting, how they're going to actually impact a population. So this is all to say basically what Danielle said. While it has been helpful to have a policy background, I am still learning something new every day. So you learn a lot on the job.
I think that although a lot of your work that you'll be doing is policy related, there are a lot of transferable skills, whether that's being a leader or being able to speak about why API representation is important to you, because I think something that's emphasized in the fellowship. And so when you become a fellow, you get this APAICS pin, and there's sort of this requirement, but a lot of us like love to wear it because we're so proud of being a fellow. And so there is this element of whatever room you step into, you are a representation of APAICS, of the entire community. And so I think, yes, obviously direct policy experience is important, but I think the type of people that attract the program are people who are leaders, people who have on campus been a part of their API student organizations, or were teaching assistants for policy classes or API history classes, and that leadership is a critical component of being a good staffer and also being a part of the APAICS team. And so I think there are different skills that you can highlight if your number one strength isn't that direct policy experience. Yeah, I think there is quite a range of people who have experience. There are people that, are recent grads, but people who are also med student, like have MDs or have JDs. So it really does vary. And I think that is a really unique part of the program, that you're exposed to so many different types of individuals with different experience in your one cohort. It's not just one type of people. It's really varied.
Yes, as Jennifer referenced, we do have a current fellow who's an MD. So she went through her residency and fellowship and was practicing as a physician and joined us as a fellow. So she's now working on health policy for a senator. So it really, I think a lot of offices do value like diverse backgrounds. So if you don't have policy experience, you should not feel discouraged to apply for the fellowship program. The next question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years, and how do you think the APAICS Fellowship has shaped that vision? And Jennifer, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think in 5 years, I still want to be in the federal government space. I still want to be pursuing a career in public service. And whether that's, I really can't say what that job will be, but I do know the space that I want to be in. And I do know that I want to continue, fostering relationships with the API community. And there are so many people that I've that were strangers and I've become mentors. And so I think hopefully in 5 years, I have enough experience where I'm able to help like build that pipeline and continue to be a part of that community. And so no particular job, but I do want to be in the federal government workspace and in the workforce.
Yeah, I don't know exactly like what job title I would want in the next 5 years, but I do think being an APAICS Fellow has opened up my horizons a lot. I think there's just a lot of possibilities I can't even imagine for myself in 5 years, which is the beauty of meeting so many people in such interesting spaces. So I guess that's not a very definitive answer, but I'm really excited for the next 5 years. It's maybe my concrete answer, and the APAICS Fellowship is a large reason why I am.
So the next question, I think it's more in like the financial side of things. So this person said, I'm worried about applying for this fellowship, is whether or not I can sustain myself with a grant stipend amount, given that DC has such a high cost of living, especially coming from a low income background. Did you all find alternative sources of income, and how are you able to sustain yourself? So Priya, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think that the $27,000 is like financially a little bit more complicated than it looks like at the outset. I will say I got to work for a couple of years before I moved up to DC, so I had savings. I had a lot of privilege in that sense. It is a city that it's expensive, which is really difficult, but it's a little less expensive than I think it seems at the outset. Yeah, which is all to say, like, one of the hard parts about public service is oftentimes that it attracts folks who really, really care about making the world a better place. But that is oftentimes less financially well compensated than other careers.
Yeah, I am originally from Virginia, and so I also was really lucky that I got to live at home, and I chose to live at home. But I also do know people from our fellowship and also just colleagues on the Hill where there are housing. There are places to look for housing where you have like a row house, for example, is really a popular type of housing for Hill interns or Hill fellows or Hill staffers, and it's really close in proximity to your workplace. And I think that there are definitely ways that you can make it happen. I will say that you're not, I hope I can say this, like, you're not taxed on the money for monthly income, so that does help. And I think that is like a huge plus. But otherwise, I think that if you reach out to other fellows and say, and this is a question that really does come up a lot on the Hill, it's conversations about pay, about how you afford the city while you're in public service, and specifically on the Hill. And so it is a very common conversation. And there are definitely people that, will not skirt around the question and will definitely answer the question directly. And I think that there are definitely open conversations and a lot of different housing options. Yeah.
Yeah, Jennifer mentioned that it's not taxed. Yeah, so the amount per month that you take home is, it's more than you think, because you would, I think a lot of people would assume that 27,000 would be like half of what you actually take home. Like it's the actual amount that you get. So that's one. And I think the other, component that helps is that we do pay for your transportation, like round trip, for you to move to DC. So especially if you're coming from like the West Coast or somewhere really far, like that is a huge plus, because I know flights have been getting really expensive. So we will cover that cost for you, round trip. And then the other thing is, Jennifer mentioned this a little bit, that in Congress, especially, people are definitely talking about the salary level of making sure that congressional staff are getting compensated better. So they just passed rules to make sure the lowest salary rate is $45,000. And they're planning on raising the cap for senior staff as well, so that it doesn't discourage people from working in Congress. So that's something that you can think about as you think about applying for the fellowship, but also thinking about post-fellowship, whether you want to stay on the Hill or not. Those are, it's honestly looking great. It has a positive outlook, because a lot of people are advocating for better pay, and things are actually changing. So it's definitely a good thing. We're on the right path. So I hope that doesn't, the financial side of things don't discourage you to apply, because there are ways to figure it out. And a lot of people do live with like roommates, and we have a current fellow who lives with a former fellow. They're roommates now. So, that's another way to find friends and bond with each other. So there are definitely ways to work it out. The next question is with regards to your post-grad experience. What do you think helped you stand out the most from other candidates? And we'll start with Jennifer.
I think, well, each application is reviewed. I mean, I obviously don't know how it's reviewed, but I would just focus on making sure that you provide as honest of answers as possible, and just take the time to really reflect on why you want to do the fellowship, and why you want to pursue government work, and why API representation is important to you. And obviously, I think writing skills are a key component of this job. And so making sure that in all of the materials that you provide, that there are no errors grammatically or spelling wise. But I think just focusing on why you are a good fit for this fellowship because of your interest in government work and public service and API representation. I think that helped me stand out, just because I really did take some time. I think I took about like a month to write my essays, which was a long time, but I took it sort of as a process to really think about, oh, post-grad, is this like, what do I want to do with my career? Like, is this something I want to do full time? Is this something I can see myself doing 5-10 years down the line?
Yeah, and I worked for like 2.5 years before I started the APAICS Fellowship. So I think there's a few ways that my post-grad experience helped. I don't know if helped me stand out from the rest of the candidates, but really helped me decide whether or not this was the right choice for me, and decide how to frame my application. So I think part of it for me was really understanding why I was doing public service, and understanding the different parts of government. Because I worked at a state level before, I got a lot of experience in just how policies actually impact people. I think at the federal level, it's really interesting because it impacts the entire country. But when you do local and state government, which I am always a huge advocate for too, you get to see why those federal policies work the way they do, and kind of the unintentional impacts of them, and the ways that they actually exist in vivo. So I think, as far as standing out as an applicant, I think that probably came through my application and really helped me focus exactly why I wanted to do the program, which is to understand federal policy better and to make sure that there was more representation at a federal level, that everyone's voices were being heard.
Yeah, to add to that, I think what stands out is when you give like a genuine why piece of it, why do you want this congressional fellowship? Beyond just, you want to get exposure to public service, right? So, and because we're, the APAICS work focuses on representation for AA and HPIs, that has to get tied into why you want to enter public service. And everyone has a different reason. When you talk to people in DC about how they got their entryway or why they got into public service, we all have a different story. So there's no right or wrong answer to that. It has to kind of show in a genuine way in your essay responses. So like, it's really important to have that reflection time of like why you want to do this. And on that part, I think it's also important to know, like it is a long process. So if you are not committed to doing this program and it's not important to you, then it's just going to feel like it's just a long wait and a waste of your time. So having that reflection time is really important, and why this fits, why now is a good time for you to do it, but also, how is this experience going to help you in your professional career? So I think that's important for the application. The next question is, how did you prepare your interviews with specific representatives and senators? For example, how did you explain your why for your motivations and qualifications to work as a fellow for a specific representative or senator? So we'll start with Priya.
Yeah, so I am a Floridian working for a Californian in an office that is very, very California heavy and very California specific, as it should be. And so I think that to prepare for my interview, I am like a huge fan of the senator that I work for. I think he's an incredible public servant. So I learned about his background. I learned about the state. And I learned about the ways in which my story aligned with his and the reasons that I really wanted to work for this member specifically. Something else you'll hear a lot on the Hill is that every office is very, very specific and very individual and very unique. And so in preparing for interviews, it's important to understand that about the office and know that about the office and tailor your answers to questions they might ask in that way. So for me, like one of the things is that the senator I work for, Senator Dia, is a son of immigrants. I am a daughter of immigrants. I think it was an easy connection to make in the sense that I think there was a lot of reasons that he pursued public service that related to the ways that I did. So, and then there's always, of course, like you're not always going to ideologically align perfectly with the person that you work for, but if you do, that is always helpful as well.
I think my experience with the fellowship also, I should have answered this way earlier, but working in a caucus, I think was a very unique experience, especially working at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, where the mission of the caucus is to advocate for the lives of Latinos and Latinas across the country and even across the world. And as someone who obviously is not Latina, but an API, I think in order to prepare for my interview, I had to really think about where were those linkages in between our two communities, and how could I, as an APAICS fellow, contribute to the caucus in terms of building a coalition between KPAC and CHC, and even with the Black Caucus with CBC, CHC is the Hispanic Caucus, KPAC is the API Caucus, and CBC is the Black Caucus. So how can I be a facilitator in my own way as just a fellow, but as someone who's just present in that room, how could I, contribute to the caucus and the caucus's work? But also, I obviously did my homework, and that's the advice that you'll get from a lot of experienced Hill staffers, is that you have to do the homework in the senators that the senator or the representative that you're interviewing for. You need to know their caucus assignments, their committee assignments. You need to know what legislative priorities what are their legislative priorities. I would, go through their website. Their website has so much information. Yeah, as someone who manages the website has so much information, and yes, there are definitely ways that it could be streamlined, but I think that if you do your due diligence, go through the website, read the bios, read the committee work, you will get a better understanding of the member, but also like how Congress works. So they're really asking, do you know what we do, and how will you be an asset to our team? So I really think that, again, doing your homework is the number one thing that you can do.
I'll also note that, by the time you interview with a congressional office, that means you're in the final round, or close to a final round. So by that point, I can serve as a resource, but also alumni who went through the same thing, they also can serve as a resource. So if you feel like you don't feel prepared and you want to ask some questions, it's perfectly okay to ask, because interviewing for a congressional office is very different from a corporate interview or a nonprofit. Like, there are very different things that you need to be prepared for. So APAICS does provide that kind of resource if you need more interview tips, or even do like a practice interview. So that's something that you can think about as you consider applying. So the next question is, when you applied and spoke to your specific policy interest in your application, how did that reflect in your office assignment? Did you actually get to influence where you were placed? I'm interested in working in environmental policy. So I can start off by answering this one. So for the placement office, so during the application process, you can list out, offices that you're interested in working. So there's a section you can fill that out. With that being said, usually I will, kind of have a list of host offices that you will get placed in. And while you can have express kind of preference, I do kind of tailor based on your experience and what the office needs are. And part of that is because, what we always encourage to our fellows and interns is to keep an open mind. Because if this is your first time working in a congressional office, there may be things that you didn't try out that you end up liking. And so I don't want our fellows and interns to feel like I'm going to put myself in a box before I even start on the Hill. And that's not really helpful in terms of career growth and trying to find careers on the Hill as well. So I will say that while you don't get the sole decision of choosing the office placement, in the decision process of where you get placed, where your preference for policy areas like that does get taken into account. So with that, I'll have our panelists kind of answer their perspectives as well. So we'll start with Jennifer.
Yeah, so going into my fellowship, I did comms work, but also I was still a ledge fellow at the CHC. And I will say that sometimes your placement might surprise you. Like, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but at the end of the fellowship, it was such a hard decision for me to leave because I wanted to stay at the CHC and I wanted to work with the team that I'd gotten to know for 9 months. And they are people that are genuinely supporters and were so encouraging, and it was such a hard decision to leave. So what Danielle said about keeping an open mind is really important, because you don't know where your next opportunity is going to come from. And if you're set on I think that it's really great to identify a policy issue area that is your number one priority. But I think if you don't have as much experience, like for example, Priya was always, she has that background, but for me, it wasn't the case. And so I was really open to anything. I had my, top 3 choices of what I wanted to work on. But I think, again, emphasizing those transferable skills, if you can apply the policy analysis skills to one issue area, that can transfer over to a different opportunity or a different portfolio. And I think it's just really beneficial to build those skills, especially on the House side. People say that it's you cover an LD or an LA will cover so many issues, from small business to financial services to postal issues, that those skills are really important, and working on ways to develop those skills in addition to gaining that expertise. And there's so many ways that you can, gain new information on the Hill. There are webinars, there are briefings, there are, stakeholders that will come and visit you and say, hey, can we talk to you about this? And there are ways that you can find opportunities to grow your knowledge on your policy issue area as a fellow, without working in that specific portfolio initially. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, everything Jennifer said. I was a situation where health policy and like poverty and inequality policy are what I'm the most interested in, and that ended up being my placement. But I think that part of it is on the Senate side, you generally do just have 1 to 3 maybe issue areas, but on the House side, you tend to cover a wide variety of things. So it depends on kind of what part of Congress you're placed in. And I think a lot of the times it is all about transferable skills. I think you can find, for example, environmental policy in almost every single policy area because everything connects to each other. So even if you're in a policy area that doesn't at first seem like it is exactly what you want to do, I think that you end up learning so much that you can transfer those skills to a policy area you might be more interested in, or you might find something that you're passionate about.
Great. So the next question is, what do you look for in the interview? So I can start by answering this question. So we did talk about interview a little bit before, and that congressional interviews are conducted very differently. So I think one of the things that's really important being able to give very clear and concise responses. So congressional interviews can take anywhere from like 15 minutes to an hour. But most of the time, people are very busy. The hiring manager is often the chief of staff or the legislative director, who have very demanding jobs, always, running around. And so it's really important that you get your responses to the questions are very concise and to the point. And so I think that's a really important tip to have. And the other thing is showing confidence and really being able to highlight your experience level and tying it into what Priya and Jennifer referred to earlier about doing your homework about the member. So understanding how the member priorities work and in terms of their legislative record, or looking at their press or social media activities, right? Like what do they post a lot about? Are they big on immigration or healthcare? What does their constituency look like? And those things are really important, especially if you're like Priya, you're interviewing for an office that you don't have district ties, and that's okay. That's one of the biggest myths about Congress, that you have to work for a member that you're from. I personally worked for a member who was not, who I didn't grow up in. So, it's definitely possible that you can work for a congressional office that you don't have you didn't grow up there. So I think doing that kind of homework is really helpful. And, again, reaching out to alumni who have gone through this program, but also reaching out to alums who are still on, in a congressional office, I think is really important, because they're the ones in the offices day to day working with them. And, that personality is also really important. So maybe they can give you tips on what the senior staff is like in that office and the office environment. So those things are really important too. So Jennifer and Priya, I don't know if you guys have anything else to add.
I am not a confident interviewee. I get really, really, really nervous at interviews. So something that's always helpful for me is practicing a lot with people who will be honest with me and honest about the responses I'm giving, and just getting more comfortable with that process. I think anytime that's something that's kind of high stakes, like a fellowship that you really want. It's hard to keep composure and project the confident self that you normally are. So I think practice is always my advice for interviews.
That's honestly such great advice because I was so nervous for my interviews with APAICS. I remember I was shaking and the interviewer told me, "Hey, just relax a little bit. Like it's going to be okay." And I think that that's also a part of the application process, is that you have those practice interviews with the APAICS community and alumni who, determine that fit, determine are they the right people for it to be a part of our community. And so I will say I was extremely nervous. My hands were shaking. I was so sweaty. But again, like Priya, I had practiced my answers. Maybe a little too much. Maybe that's what made me too nervous, but I think it really helped. They genuinely understand at least on the APAICS interview front, what you're going through and why you want to do this. And, the steps that you've taken to land the interview. And so I think that you should find some comfort that you're in like great hands and people that really care about you because you took the step to apply. And so, do your homework, be prepared, but don't be too nervous because at least within the APAC stage, there are people who have your back. And if you proceed from that stage and interview with offices, you will still have those people who have your back in order to support you and help you and make sure you land that job at the office that you want. So really, I think like Priya and Danielle both hit the nail on its head. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other part of the process and kind of providing a little bit of context of it. So like Jennifer mentioned, you do have to go through the initial round of interviews with APAICS selection committee. So these are people who previously served as APAICS Fellows, board members, senior API staff. They will conduct these interviews. And so that's part of like the first round, and then you get sent, if you pass that round, you get sent to a congressional office and then interview with them directly. So I think another kind of another thing to think about is, if you've gone through the first round of interviews and you're up for the next one and you're preparing, you can reach out and ask for the first interviewer and, ask if they have any feedback or recommendations on how to strengthen your interview skills. And again, that is part of the APAICS network. And that's, we're trying to be supportive and making sure that you feel prepared and confident enough to move on to the next steps. So. Okay, so before we move on to the last question, I wanted to ask like more of a fun question. So what was your favorite part of your fellowship program? So just for context for participants today, so Priya and Jennifer, they started early at the end of last year and then finished this summer. So what was your favorite part about the fellowship in terms of like the more fun side of things?
We both have fun things. We promise. Well, I think both of us really enjoy our jobs. But on the like the other side of things, the gala is really fun. I think like throughout the fellowship, you get this opportunity to like build these really close bonds with your cohort and with other like former APAICS fellows. And then you work really hard usually, and then you finally have this like fun event where you get to see all of these like really prominent like API folks in politics, which is like specifically exciting, I think, for all of us. And there was like Steve Aoki came this year because the phenomenal team at APAICS made it an incredibly fun gala. So just like getting to like blow off steam and like have a good time with these friends that you've made over a number of months or a number of years has been really great.
So the APAICS Gala is something that happens every year in May during API Heritage Month. And that's one of the things that's one of the benefits for our fellows. So you get a ticket to go to our gala, which is, it is a pretty high in demand event of the year every year. So and especially this year, because that was the first time doing it since COVID, I think the demand was even higher, but even pre-COVID, everyone wants to go. It's always a fun time. So, but if you get selected as a fellow, that's definitely one of the top perks. Jennifer?
I think one of my favorite memories is actually work related, but it was one of my first couple of days on the job. I was staffing my comms director, who was like, you should get pictures. Speaker Pelosi is speaking on the House steps, and we need pictures of our boss at that event. And I said, okay. So I grabbed the camera, ran from Rayburn to the Hill, was taking pictures. But then one of our fellowship cohort, members was right next to me. And so we were like, oh my gosh, we can't believe this is our lives right now. I can't believe that, I'm running into you. And I think the best part of the fellowship was, the more time and time goes on, you'll get to meet more and more people. So when you step into a room, you go from not knowing anyone to knowing 3 or 4 people, knowing 5 to 6 people, and people start to really feel like family. There are staff associations that you can join, like CAPASA and CICASA, where they are the people that, are your go-to people in the room. And that is a really special feeling for me, especially coming out of college and wondering if I would be able to be successful in this job. I think, looking around the room, knowing that, there's at least 1 or 2 people that have your back, was really special and fun for me. And obviously, all of the different bonding events and opportunities that we had, at the gala or the health summit or the legislative conference hosted by APAICS, was also really fun. There's a lot of events where there's free food on the Hill, so that's always a favorite part for me.
Yeah, having access to those receptions and lunch briefings where they have free food, it's definitely a huge plus. Okay, so the last question before we end today's session is, what advice do you have for potential applicants looking to stand out? And we'll start with Priya this time.
I think that it's kind of what we talked about before. It's really deciding why you were applying for this fellowship. For me, it was deciding why I was applying for the fellowship. And like Jennifer said, taking a long time and distilling that into those application essays. So I think standing out is as much about deciding why this is the path that you're taking and why you want to take this as your next step, as anything else, and really speaking to your experiences and kind of showing that story of how what you have done in the past has gotten you to both want to apply to the APAICS Fellowship and then also really sparked a passion for ensuring that there's more equity and representation in public service.
Yeah, I think to stand out, it's like Priya said, everything that we've talked about, doing your homework, knowing your why, and taking the time to reflect and developing really great essays for your responses. And make sure that treat this like another application, but it is different from a job application because it's not just a cover letter. They want to know who you are and whether you're a great fit for the community. So don't be afraid to ask someone that you trust to review and to see if what you wrote makes sense. If there's a clear message behind, that's my comms part coming in, make sure that you have a clear message and that after people read your essay or after people, speak to you, they clearly know why you want to be here and what issues you're passionate about, specifically within the area of representation and equity. So yeah, I think being, as Danielle said earlier, clear and concise in everything that you do throughout the application process.
All right. With that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you to Priya and Jennifer for spending time with us and sharing your advice and recommendations. So I hope many of you will consider applying for our Congressional Fellowship Program. So the application deadline is January 27 next year. So I hope this was all helpful, and thank you again for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.